I'll tell you what, it is a real treat for me to be here. And number one, I want to say what you're a part of is something very, very special. And I know you know, but I just want you to know from an outsider looking in, what you're a part of is something very, very special. And we need more of this all across Chicagoland and around the world. And that is what's going to accomplish the Jesus mission. All right? And I also want you to know I love these two. And I hope you know, as someone, again, from the outside looking in, these are high-integrity people who love Jesus, who love his mission. And can I add this too? I'm around a lot of pastors who, and we'll just keep this right here, okay? They want to build their castle. They're more concerned about a castle than they are God's kingdom. But I'll tell you, that's not the case here. These are people that want to see you grow, and they want to see God's kingdom grow all around the world. And I think we should also thank them for it. Thank you very much. And it's great to have my wife Sue here with me. I'll tell you, I'm going to pick up kind of where Max left off, though, too, where he's talking about advancing the Jesus mission, the Great Commission, that kind of stuff. And I want to spend some time there. There's some things we've been working through, and I think for many of us to actually pull that off, you know, to make disciples, to baptize folks, to go into all the world, maybe we've just missed the obvious. Maybe it's a lot more right in front of us. Maybe we just missed the obvious. Sue and I, we were at some friends of ours up in Geneva, Jim and Julie. We were at their house. They had us over for dinner, and I think you guys were all huddled kind of in the kitchen, and I was in the dining room. And in the dining room, I was looking at a print that they had on the wall. And I really was kind of taken with this print. It was a really just interesting, intriguing print, you know, kind of a picture in a frame there. And so I said something to Jim and Julie and Sue back in the kitchen. I said, hey, I really, really like this print. And Sue starts laughing. And then Jim starts laughing. And then Julie, they're all just chuckling. And I'm like, and they're laughing at me. I'm like, what? I just said I really, really like this print on your wall. And then Sue says, well, you should like it. We gave it to them. And then she adds this, true story. Then she adds this, she goes like, and furthermore, we have the exact same one in our house. Right? I mean, sometimes you just miss the obvious. I think that's what we're going to discover here, because a lot of what I'm going to say is kind of obvious, but maybe we actually haven't implemented it in the most obvious kind of way. The other day, I was pulling. As I was pulling into my driveway a few weeks. It's been longer than that. A few months ago, I noticed a big orange moving truck that was pulling in next door. And when a big yellow moving truck pulls in next door, a big orange moving truck pulls in next door, that means brand new neighbors. And new neighbors is kind of like when you're back in elementary school. It could be like, wow, a new kid showing up, and this new kid, maybe it's my new best friend, or you know, maybe it's going to be a nemesis. You just don't know what it's going to be, right? But either way, no matter who this neighbor or what this neighbor turns out to be, the Bible says this: love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. In fact, 8 different times it says, love your neighbor, 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 love your neighbor. Help me out. What does it say? 8 different times. It actually calls it the royal law. It says you're to love your neighbors. Now, sometimes, and you may have some of these folks, it is hard to love our neighbors. But here's been my experience, okay? You got some of those, huh? Okay. Here's been my experience. Occasionally that happens. I remember we had one neighbor, they were constantly letting their pit bull loose in the backyard. They got busted for drug possession. That was kind of a hard one. But most of my neighbors, they're actually pretty decent folks. Most of them, it's not so much really. I can follow that royal law. I love them. But the question for me isn't so much kind of like feeling a love for them or wanting to love them, but it's like, how? How do I actually love them? How do I show them God's love? Or more specifically, like your lead pastor was challenging you, how do I actually introduce them to God's love and introduce them to Jesus? How do I do that? So here's what I want you to do, because I would love for this to be really just applicable for every one of you. Some of you I see are taking notes. If you're taking notes, I want you to jot down the name of a new neighbor. And for some of you, just go ahead and take out your phone. Open up your notes tab. Open up your notes and just put in there. I want you to put in there a name of a new neighbor. Now, you might be like, I don't have any new neighbors. Well, I want you to think bigger picture, because in the Bible, when you use the term neighbor, it could be like where you live. It could also be where you work. Maybe there's somebody brand new in your workspace. It could also be where you hang out, where you play. So think about someone who's new in one of those spheres of influence, where you live, work, or play, and I want you to write down the name of that person. Go ahead and just jot that down, put it on your phone, or if you need to, just even mentally. Give me a little nod if you got that. You got a name of a person? Okay, good. Got a name of a person? Yeah, okay, yes. How about way back there in the back? Got a name of a person? Yeah? Okay, very good. How are we doing back over there? Yep, okay. Yes. Okay, everybody's got one. And I want to, again, reemphasize this. How do you plan to love them? 8 times, right? I mean, the Bible's pretty serious about this. How do you intend to show them God's love? How do you plan to show them Jesus? Now, my story, and part of my story, when I first became a Christ follower, as a young adult, I mean, I was so pumped, so excited about the love of God, and particularly grace, that God loves me just as I am and not as I should be. I mean, I wanted to share that with everybody. Everybody should know about this. And I tried in very obnoxious ways. I did street evangelism. Anybody know what street evangelism is? Okay, some of you have been victimized by that, huh? And that's what I do. I would basically verbally assault people. They'd just be out in the street, and I would walk up to some of you are laughing. It's true. I'm going to totally embarrass you because you sat in the front row. So, if you were in the street, I might just walk up to you and go like, have you come to the place in your spiritual life where you know for sure if you die tonight, you go to heaven? She's like, please make it stop, right? And if you were to die tonight and stand before God, and he was asking, why should I let you into heaven? What would you say? And I would do this to people. And I pretty much I didn't even get this good of a reaction, okay? and what I found is, I was asking questions people didn't want to answer. And in some cases, I was answering questions they weren't even asking. And it didn't work. Again, my heart was in a good place because I was genuinely fired up about Jesus. But it didn't work. So you know what I did? So I tried that, and that was as a young adult. Once we planted the church, I was like, okay, I'm going to try a different tack. And I swung all the way the other direction. And I said, I'm just going to let my life be an example of what Jesus would be in my neighborhood. I'm just going to try my best to live like Jesus, and that'll show through. I don't need words. And you know what happened then? People liked having me as a neighbor. I was a good neighbor. People liked having me, I think, in the neighborhood. I was well liked. But I don't remember anybody actually saying yes to Jesus. So, no there, no here. And so in my frustration, both for me personally and now as a pastor, because I'm pastoring a church, and I wanted those people to also be able to know how they could love people, how they could introduce other people to Jesus, I began to kind of look for something else. Now, I was familiar with God's, what I would call blessing strategy. In Genesis chapter 12, we'll throw it up on the screen here. It says this is God speaking to Abraham, and God said this, I'm going to bless you, I'm going to make your name great, and you're going to be a blessing, and all the people of the earth will be blessed through you. So God speaking to Abraham said, listen, Abraham, here's the way it's going to work. I'm going to bless you, and then you're going to bless all the people around you. That was his strategy. Now, keeping it real, when I'd read that, I kind of thought of it like a pithy saying. Kind of like, oh, you're blessed to be a blessing. I mean, it felt like a bumper sticker, or it felt like something maybe was knit into a pillow that would sit in your grandmother's couch. Blessed to be a blessing. Oh, that's cute, right? I didn't think of it as a strategy for kind of changing the world. Well, then I ran across an interesting and fascinating doctoral study. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, interesting doctoral study. But actually embedded in this doctoral study was a couple pages, and they did this research project called Blessers versus Converters. Okay, Blessers versus Converters. And the study was based on 2 teams of missionaries. They both went to Thailand, but they went to Thailand with 2 distinctly different missional strategies. So you have the converters with the sole intention, they're just going to convert people, like I was trying to do over here, right? Evangelize people, save souls. Then you had the blessers, and the blessers went with the intention, no, we're going to bless people. Whoever comes my way, I want to do my best to be I've been blessed, I want to bless them. I want to be a blessing. They followed them for 2 years, and here's what they discovered. What they discovered is that the blessers, their presence in the community, actually created a lot of social good, a better society, a better community life, what some people would call created social capital. But for the converters, it was unnoticeable that they'd been there. Made no difference, positive or negative. But here's the second thing they discovered, and this was very surprising. The blessers had 50 times as many conversions. They had 100 people who came to find and follow Jesus versus the converters who only had 2. So I began to look at that, and the bottom line was, you know what, the best way maybe to accomplish the Jesus mission of reaching and restoring the world is to be a blesser. Well, then on top of that, I ran across this kind of eye-opening study from a group called the Barna Research Group. And what Barna did is they went and they asked all of our neighbors, okay, they asked our neighbors, literally, what would you value in a person with whom you talk about spiritual matters? If you're going to talk, they asked our neighbors, if you're going to talk about spiritual things, what kind of things would you look for in a friend that you talk to? Interesting enough, okay, I'll give you the top 3 responses, but here's what's interesting too, a quick sidebar. 79% of people say they would talk to a friend about spiritual matters. Did you catch the key word there? Talk to who? Talk to me. Talk to a friend. 8 out of 10 people, if you'll just be a friend. Well, here's what the survey came back, and it said this. Here's what they're looking for. Who you would talk to about spiritual things? They said, number 1, I talked to someone who would listen without judgment. I would talk to somebody who would listen without judgment. Listening, I'm telling you this, is one of the purest acts of love. What your neighbors, what your friends, that person you wrote down, what they want is they want someone who will lean in, someone who will listen, and who will assume the best of them. And here was the sad news, kind of an undercurrent of this. 2/3 of the folks said they had nobody in their life that would listen to them without judgment. Nobody. Here's the second thing they found. Who would you talk to about spiritual things? Someone who would listen without judgment. Secondly, someone who will allow me to draw my own conclusions. This is a great reminder, okay? Our friends, the people you wrote down, the people you're thinking about, our neighbors are not projects, they're people. And they're not looking for someone to force a conclusion on them. But what they need from you is they need for you to just love them, to trust them, and to befriend them to have their own spiritual journey. I know we have several people in the room, and I'm so excited about this. They're getting baptized today, right? My hunch is your path to Jesus was probably not like, oh, there's Jesus, straight path. You probably took a few detours along the way, right? Like the rest of us. And that's what's going to happen with your neighbors. And what we have to do, you just consistently keep loving them and loving them and loving them and loving them. Let them draw their own conclusions. Here's the third thing they said. Someone who has confidence in sharing their own perspective. I call this paying the relational rent. You pay the relational rent, and once you've invested in that relationship by listening to them and loving them, no matter what they ultimately decide, you'll have a permanent place in their life. And then you'll get the chance to tell the story with confidence, your story, the difference that God's love and grace has made. In fact, they may even ask you. So, with all this information, my brother John and I, we began to go back, because we wanted something for ourselves, we also wanted something for the people in our church. We went back and said, okay, let's take a look again at the Gospels, how Jesus did this. All right, and what began to emerge, we looked through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is several different missional practices. In fact, there were 5 key missional practices that kind of came to the service we saw Jesus use over and over and over again. And then we took these 5 different missional practices and we said, okay, let's just make it as memorable as we possibly can so that people could understand, here's how you love your neighbor. And we not miss the obvious anymore. And so what we came up with was a simple acronym that actually spells the word bless. All right? So here we go. And I'm telling you, I would encourage you, use these every day. Every day. And this is how you can actually go ahead and fulfill that that royal law, that royal law of loving your neighbor. All right, the first one starts with B. It's a little bit of a stretch, but here we go. All right, B is begin with prayer. Begin with prayer. It begins with praying. This is how you discover your mission, but also how you do the mission. And when Jesus, think about Jesus, when he started his mission, what is the first thing he did? His earthly ministry. Luke chapter 6, it says he went on a mountainside and he prayed. And we do exactly the same thing. We begin with prayer. And what we have to remember is in our neighborhood, long before you moved there, God was already at work. And God, he wants it for your neighbor worse than you do. That's why he sent his son, and he actually died for them. He wants it worse than you. And so what I would encourage you to do, just pick 4 neighbors. Take 4 houses, 4 apartments, 4 neighbors. If it's an office, 4 cubicles. If it's where you hang out, where you play, 4 different people that you hang out and you play with. Take 4. And every morning you begin to pray for them. And I know a lot of people, they'll actually, they'll do a prayer walk. They'll walk their neighborhood. You know, it's good exercise, but you get out and as you're doing it, you're just praying for every house. Just praying for them. Give me an opportunity to love those folks. Give me an opportunity to love those folks. And as you get to know, then you're praying specifically things for them. Now, after you begin to pray for them, that's the B. Then the L stands for listen. You listen. And again, if you read the Gospels, Jesus was constantly asking questions and then listening. And sadly, I think most Christians, particularly these days, are known more for their talking than their listening. And if we truly want to bless people around us, we have to get to know them. We got to get to know what are their aspirations? What are their dreams? What are their hurts? What are their pains? What's their story? And again, if we go back to the Gospels, Jesus in Luke chapter 18, I love this. He meets this blind guy, and he doesn't assume that the blind guy even wants to see. What does he do? He asks him a question. Jesus comes up and says, "What do you want me to do?" Yeah. He actually gives him the dignity of saying, I'm not going to assume that I know how to fix you. But instead, what do you want me to do? And then lets him respond, and then he heals him. He listened. Okay, so you begin with prayer. This is how, okay, really practically. How do you love that neighbor? You begin with prayer, then you listen to them. Here's the third one. You're going to like this one, okay? The E stands for eat. Can I get some a little love on that one, huh? All right, there we go. That's right. Again, we see this again in Luke chapter 19, the story of Jesus with Zacchaeus, right? I mean, Jesus meets Zacchaeus. He doesn't even invite Zacchaeus out to lunch. He says, "No, I'm coming over to your house for lunch." How about that? He goes there, and after lunch, what does it say? It says, "Salvation has come to this house today." Salvation has come as a result of that lunch, a simple meal. And here's the thing, and I think this is a really kind of a hinge point in all these blessed practices, because nothing moves an acquaintance to friendship faster than a meal. Nothing does. In fact, I tried this out in the first service, and I was asking Max and Juliet, and I didn't know what they were going to say. I asked them, I said, "Well, why don't you just go tell them, what was the first time it kind of like the love, became real, going like, wow, I think this is something?" A picnic in Greenwich Park in London. And that's where it went from kind of really an acquaintance to going like, oh, I think there's something. Now, for Sue and I think we both say Aurelio's Pizza in the south suburbs. All right? You guys know Aurelio's Pizza? Yeah, I'll tell them Joe sent you. I know. And and we did a couple things together, but it was kind of like, it was over pizza, and it kind of went for a long time going like, wow, I think I got a chance here, right? And it was like, and there's something about meals together. And again, we're talking about how do you love these people? And one of the things I love about this too is, how many times do you eat every day? 3? As often as I can. Let's say 3. Okay, say 3 times a day. 3 times a day, 7 days a week, that's 21 different missional opportunities to love your neighbors. And it could be dessert, it could be coffee, or if you're English, it could also be tea, right? It could be any of those things. These are all opportunities to love people. And here's what I love about the B.L.E.S.S practice too. Begin with prayer. Listen, eat. This is not like an added church program where you have to show up at a church building and go, oh, we have to show up, and it's an extra thing I have to do. No, this is how you live your life. How you live your life. Sue and I, when are Dave and Nikki coming over? Is that next week? We got some new neighbors. They're coming over next week. Sue invited them over. I mean, I don't know. I guess I don't even know I don't know if they're believers or not yet. We don't have any idea. But it's going to be fun. You know what I'm saying? They're coming over our house. We're going to cook on the grill, I suppose. We'll probably be back in our patio. I mean, this is how you love your neighbors. I'm telling you, people can do this. Yeah. We can do this, right? We're praying for them. We're listening to them. Once we get to know them, hey, why don't you guys come on over for dessert? Why don't you guys come over for a cookout? Why don't you guys come over here? Let's have coffee together. You can do this. In fact, my friend Alan Hirsch, she says this: we can change the world through eating. Now there's a church challenge you like, right? All right, I can do that, Pastor, right? All right, so here's the truth, though. Now, follow me on this. These are kind of epigenetic. They build on each other. You begin with prayer. You're praying for these folks. As you're praying for those, you're going to find your heart really turning towards them because God's working inside you, and you're really you're feeling even more intensely this love for them. And then you get opportunities. You're listening to them. You're having conversations. Then as you get opportunities, you're actually moving that from an acquaintance to a friendship because you're sharing these meals together. Let me throw this out there too. What was Jesus' nickname? Do you remember Jesus' nickname? Rabbi, yeah, it was kind of a title, Rabbi. But one of the nicknames they gave him was Friend of Sinners. Did you catch that? Friend. Sometimes when I teach this stuff too, I kind of joke and say, you know what? This is like a remedial course on how to make friends with people. Right? And quite frankly, I think I could also probably, if I wanted to, like if you were single, I could probably help you get a date. This is kind of like how you get a date. You pray for them, you listen to them, you eat together, right? Okay, now you guys are interested, aren't you? You're going, oh, I never thought about that. This is really good stuff. So here's what happens, though, because these build each. So you're praying for them, you listen, you eat together, and here's what happens. As you move from acquaintance to friendship, you eat together, they will tell you how to love them. Because the first S in the B.L.E.S.S is serve. Serve. They will tell you how to love them. Because now you're becoming friends. This is not rocket science, people. It's obvious. Yeah. But we just haven't done it. They're going to tell you, man, we're really struggling as parents. Or, man, I hate my job. Or, I just got some bad news about, my folks, an illness. All the stuff that life brings, they're going to tell you how to love them. And again, back to Jesus, right? Jesus did all these things. This was where we got this stuff. In fact, he even says his mission was to serve, not to be served. Yeah. So once they tell you how to love them, then you love them in that way. And then the last S, okay, after you begin with prayer, you listen, you eat, and you serve. In time, you'll have the opportunity to share your story. Now, I assaulted you at the beginning of the talk, right? Almost mortified you. And you're going, please don't come down here again. Don't do it again. And I won't. And here's the thing. Sometimes, like sharing the story, sharing the gospel, it's not that we're deprioritizing. Maybe it's not the thing you lead with. Maybe you lead with relationship. And as you build that relationship, as you build that friendship, then all of a sudden when we have a friendship, then that story holds a lot more weight. And you tell them the difference that Jesus, and you're bold about this. You tell them the difference that Jesus has made in your life. Let me tell you about my friend Michael. And sorry about that. This goes back a few years, but this is when it really convinced me that these B.L.E.S.S practices are something that, no, this is how we're supposed to love our neighbors. And actually would work. My friend Michael is a guy who, I remember the first time, like church even came up in a conversation. He told me, frankly, he was mad at God, and he kind of thought the whole thing around church was just a bunch of BS. All right? That's kind of where he was. Well, Michael's story, he grew up in an abusive home. He moved out on his own when he was 15 years of age. On his own when he was 15. Despite moving out on his own, he was determined. He finished high school, actually went to college, was a pretty successful D1 athlete. At one point, through track and field, almost ran a 4-minute mile. If any of you know much about track and field, that's very impressive. Got married a terrific young lady, started his own company, and actually did very well for himself. But as I got to know Michael, it happened because both our boys ran cross country over at Neuqua Valley High School. And I remember the moment he said to me, he said, for 20 years, I felt like I've had the burden of not just living one life, but living two lives. For 20 years, I felt like I've had the burden of not just living one life, but living two lives. And again, there was a backstory. When Michael was in grad school in California, he had a best friend. His best friend was a guy named Jay. And he would talk about Jay as Jay was the kind of guy I wanted to be like. Jay was this just kind of terrific human, very spiritual, very moral. He was the kind of person he just admired him and wanted to be like him. They were hanging out. They went for a drive. And while on this drive, they got in a car accident. And in this car accident, Michael survived. But Michael's best friend, Jay, he did not. And he watched Jay die in that car. And Michael was actually found negligent. And so every day, you can imagine this, every day he felt and lived with the guilt and shame of what happened that day back in grad school. Eventually, he moved away from Southern California, and other than his wife, he never spoke of this again. So think about this, inside 2 decades, 20 years, he felt this burden of not just living one life, but two lives, one for him and also for his friend Jay, who died. So, we have 2 kids in high school. They're both running cross country together, right? And that's when I met Michael. And before, we actually have an app now that we use for the B.L.E.S.S app. If you want to check it out, it's really remarkable. But back then, I would write in my journal. And one of the names that I'd write in that journal was Michael's name. I'd write the word bless. I'd write about 8 names, and one of them was Michael. And so for 3 years, I prayed for Michael. Now, like I said, begin with prayer, right? Begin with prayer. So both our sons are running cross country and running track in high school, and we both loved the sport, and we loved our boys, and that kind of drew us together. And so we'd be at meets, and we'd hang out, and we'd talk, and sometimes we'd have out-of-town meets where, like travel team kind of stuff, and we'd go places, and we would travel together, and we would hang out, and that's where we'd talk, and I would listen, right? So I'm beginning with prayer, because I'm praying for him every day. I'm listening. Well, I remember the point where the conversation towards spiritual things. And actually, Michael brought it up. And Michael was even suggesting, he said, you know what, we should get together for breakfast sometime. I was like, okay, let's do it. And so we started this routine of meeting for breakfast every couple of weeks. And not only that, then he was kind of a foodie, and so he'd find a new restaurant he liked somewhere. It wouldn't necessarily be for breakfast. He's like, hey, we should go check out this new restaurant. So we go check out this new restaurant together. So I'm praying for him. I'm listening. Now we're sharing meals. We're eating together. Now, Michael, like I told you, he had his own company. He was used to being the boss, right? He's used to being the boss. And I remember one breakfast, he actually said this to me. He said, you know what? Hey, Dave, in the past, I've hired executive coaches. I want you to be my spiritual coach. I was like, okay, how hard is that, right? So I began to serve him that way. We with intention, began to talk about spiritual things because he was genuinely curious. Then the last story. I remember the breakfast, and it was probably, maybe 2 miles from here, where we sat in the corner booth, and for the first time, outside of his wife, Michael brought this up, and he said, you know what? It was 20 years ago today when I killed my friend. He said it. And it wasn't just that breakfast, and it wasn't just my praying and my listening and eating and serving and storytelling. There were a whole bunch of other people too. But that was the day when I got to share with him. Listen, I'm telling you, Michael, there's a place where you can find forgiveness for that. Not only can you find forgiveness, but God can take the worst things in our life, the very worst things in our life, our worst stories, and he can use them for great good. He can redeem it, I'm telling you. And I got to see him say yes to Jesus in that moment. And, well, this goes back a couple of years now, but I want you to hear, this is from my friend Michael and him telling the story. Here it is.
I really did not have a relationship with God, and I did not think about it. It wasn't a goal or objective of mine. And my mentality was, if you want to get something done, you can only really rely on you. And so that's the way I approached the world for many, many years. My name is Michael Kinney. I'm married to Stacy, and I have 4 children, Austin, Zachary, Aiden, and Zane, and I've been coming to community for 2 years. Jay was my roommate in graduate school. So February of 1997, Jay and I went to go see a concert. And on the way home from that concert, back to our apartment, we were in a car wreck. Jay died in the car wreck, extremely emotionally devastated by the loss of my friend. And I felt very responsible, and I was very, very angry with God. So I decided then that I'm going to live 2 lives, one for me and one for Jay. And I began trying to do that through my activities. Everything that I would achieve, it never was enough. It never made me feel differently. I still felt very angry, very alone. It didn't matter how hard I tried or what I accomplished. Something was still missing. I just kept, walking around carrying these bags of bricks, never even considering putting them down and maybe asking for help. And my oldest son, Austin, he began going to church with his good friend Caleb. I remember he got baptized, and it really took me aback that he had, on his own, figured out something that I could never figure out. And so I began going to church with a more open mind, trying to pay attention to the signs and to the messages that people were sharing with me. I also have a son who has severe autism, and he has no ego. And so I have this wonderful reflection of what Jesus Christ looks like without ego with my son Aiden. So the combination of watching Austin and watching and reflecting on my relationship with Aiden really turned my views from egoicism and hubris to humility. And then I was invited to go to a small group, and I knew sort of what that was, but I didn't really know what it was. I'd never been in a small group, and I was very nervous. Very nervous to attend my first session. Particularly the subject was on regret. I remember thinking, wow, how apropos that my first small group is on the subject that I need to learn the most about. And it really opened my eyes. The kind of the tipping point for me was on the 20th anniversary of this car accident, which killed my friend. It's a dark day for me, a very upsetting day, and my family doesn't have any idea, except for my wife, why am I so upset? Not just all of the time, why am I sort of angry all of the time, but why am I particularly upset this day? What I found was that after I started sharing this story, particularly with my family, and then in some cases with my close friends, that every single time I talked about what happened, it was like I was taking a brick out of the bag and putting it on the ground, and my load was just getting lighter and lighter and lighter. And every single time I did it, I felt better. For most of my life, I thought that asking for help was a sign of weakness. And what I've come to realize is that asking for help is really a sign of strength. And then if you really want some help, and you really want to go to the right place, the best place to go is asking God for help and accepting Jesus into your life.
And this was about 2 months later, me and his son got a chance to baptize him. Is that pretty cool? When Max said, hey, would you share some things? Part of it, I'm a huge fan of what you're doing here at the church, and I love it. So it's a delight for me to be here. But the other thing is that experience there. As a pastor, you get to baptize like lots of people, but this was different. Why was it different? It was my friend. It was my friend. And what I want for you is I want that same experience for you for you to have to share, to love your neighbor, and maybe get to baptize one of your friends. Wouldn't that be awesome? Wouldn't that be so awesome? And maybe we just kind of missed the obvious. Maybe it's like right there in the Gospels. Maybe Jesus showed us. We just never put it together in a way we could actually remember it and apply it. And maybe it's just as simple as that. Oh, we begin with prayer. We listen to those folks. We share meals so we can start to become friends with them. And then when we find out what they need, that's how we serve them that way. And then when given the opportunity, we boldly share the story. And that's how, okay? That's how you love your neighbor. And guess what? If enough of us do it, it's also how we can change the world. All right? Thanks. Love you guys.